Yes.
Good morning, Devendra, and Jai Hind, everybody.
Yes. Nitin ji has also joined. Nitin ji, namaskar.
Yes, namaskar. Good morning, and I'm joining you from Port Blair.
Oh, wow.
That's a nice place to be in, Nitin.
Yes.
At this time of the year.
I know. No, it's already getting hot.
It's just at the edge of the. You just cross the the holiday season. I've lived there for 3 years.
Yeah. I'm for work, so no holiday.
Yes, I understand.
So we will go live in 2 minutes, sharp at 11:30.
Sure.
Namaskar, Satish ji. Namaskar, Nitin ji.
Namaskar, Darshana. Swati, namaskar.
Namaskar. Welcome on board.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So देवेंद्र आप करेंगे इसको मॉडरेट?
नहीं, मैं इंट्रोड्यूस करूंगा आपको नितिन जी और Zamkrut को, and Zamkrut Oza will be the moderator.
Yes.
I'm coordinating with Zamkrut. Just a second.
Good morning, everyone. Am I audible?
Yes, Zamkrut.
Yeah,
Yes,
loud and clear.
Darshana, put spotlight on everyone.
Starting in 1 minute, huh?
Sure.
Swati ma'am, can we go live?
Okay, 1 second. I'll ask Tushar.
Yes.
Yes, we are live now. We can start now.
Okay. Good morning and welcome to Vesim Literati Festival, the 6th edition of Vesim Lit Fest. Unfortunately, due to COVID, we have to conduct this year's edition of Vesim Lit Fest online, but we are glad that in spite of COVID, we are actually going ahead with our Vesim Lit Fest. So I welcome our viewers once again, both on Zoom Live and Facebook Live, for the second session of the 6th edition of Vesim Lit Fest. This session is called Roaring Tiger, Crouching Dragon. India asserts, China cautious. Well, China and not Pakistan has always been considered by many defense experts as India's enemy number one. Whether it was in 1962 when Prime Minister Nehru was taken by surprise by China who attacked India in spite of Hindi Chini Bhai Bhai, or the constant territorial challenges China keeps in front of us, whether it is in Arunachal Pradesh or the recent Doklam issue, China has always been aggressive vis-a-vis India. But 2021 isn't 1962. India of 2021 isn't the India of 1962. To know and understand what has changed, let us move to the second panel for the day. Introducing the panel, first up, we have with us Lieutenant General Satish Dua. Lieutenant General Satish Dua was a former corps commander in Kashmir who retired as Chief of Integrated Defense Staff. A counter-terrorism specialist, General Dua has commanded his unit and a brigade in active militancy in Jammu and Kashmir in the line of control and counter-terrorism environment. As the Chinar Corps commander in Kashmir, he was responsible for planning and executing the surgical strikes and also controlling the huge unrest after the elimination of terrorist Burhan Wani. As Major General, he raised and commanded a new counter-terrorism division of Assam Rifles in the northeast to coordinate operations in the 3 northeastern states. General was also a commando instructor as a captain and Indian Defense Attaché in Vietnam, Cambodia, and Laos as the colonel. The general is a keen sportsman, fond of horse riding, and an adventure sports enthusiast that includes skydiving, skiing, parachute jumping, and mountain biking. During his career, General Dua was conferred with 4 awards. Our next panelist for this session is Mr. Nitin Gokhale. Nitin Gokhale is a media entrepreneur, one of South Asia's leading strategic affairs analysts and author of 7 books so far on military history, insurgencies, and wars. Starting his career in journalism in 1983, he has since then led teams of journalists across media platforms. He is a specialist in conflict coverage. Mr. Gokhale has covered insurgencies in India's northeast, the 1999 Kargil conflict, and Sri Lanka's Elam War between 2006 and 2009. Gokhale now travels across the globe to speak at seminars and conferences and delivers lectures at India's premier defense colleges. He has founded 2 niche portals, bharatshakti.in and startnewsglobal.com. To moderate the session, we have with us Mr. Zankruth Oza. Zankruth is a digital media strategist and a PR consultant. He has completed his MBA from Ulyanvosk University and is an alumnus of IIM Indore. He has led the communications team for various ministries and has worked with the Office of Honorable Minister Piyush Goyal. His work has always been at an intersection of digital communications, which is e-governance, politics, education, and entrepreneurship. He is a US Professional Fellow for Governance and Society, South and Central Asia. Mr. Oza is a versatile speaker and a social media trainer for businesses and the government. He has been the recipient of several awards for his work in the field of marketing and communications. Beyond work, he spends his time with ecosystem building activities for youth in politics, literature, and entrepreneurship. I welcome all the 3 of you and hand it over to Mr. Zankruth Oza to take it from here.
Thank you so much, Devendra, for the generous words and introduction. It has been my pleasure to be associated with WESM Literature Festival and co-founding it. And I always say this, that every colleges and institutions have alumni. I'm a professor alumni of this institute, and it always gives me immense pleasure to be connected with WESM Literature Festival. To start with, Devendra started on right point, comparing 1962 with last 2, I will say, affairs with China. And what was the major difference? So difference was the freedom given to the armed forces, the preparedness for it, the strategic involvement of, I will say, a co-involvement of government, policy, and military forces, and unanimously taming the dragon in its own den. I would like to start with a couple of questions with Lieutenant General Satish Duaji. That what could be some possible reasons for Chinese action last summer?
Thank you, Zankruth. Before I take on the question that you posed, I'd like to take a couple of minutes to put all the listeners on the same page as to the background between India and China, as to where do our contentious issue lie and why. For more strategic and research part of it, I will defer to my friend Nitin because he will have more details, and I will just give you a broad overview of how India and China borders came to be the way they are. Now, instead of having a clearly demarcated international border, we have a long line of actual control. Out of approximately 4,000 kilometers of border, nearly 3,500 kilometers is the line of actual control. So that's not really the international border the way it should have been. Line of actual control, as the word signifies, explains that it is the line of control. That means whatever area is in whosoever's control between the countries, it remains in their control. However, there are more than one sort of perceptions of these lines. So we hark back to 1962 when China occupied a large chunk of our territory, which is the area of Aksai Chin, approximately 43,000 square kilometers. In 1963, they also got another 5,000 plus square kilometers of the POK territory, which Pakistan handed over to China, called the Shaksgam Valley. Now, with both these put together, they have a large chunk of our territory. they are sort of holding on to our territory. On the other hand, all along this line of actual control, they have a certain perception of the line, and we have a different perception of the line. Without going into the reasons, but these two different perceptions are at times differing by anything between 2 to 8 kilometers. So when we have that kind of a difference in perception, we patrol up to our areas, our perception, and they patrol up to their perception. That leads to face-offs and clashes at times, which has led to various standoffs, face-offs over the period of time that we've been seeing. In the past 1 decade or so, these face-offs and clashes have become a little more belligerent. However, both the countries used to pride or take sort of pride in eventually saying that at the end of it, we have not fired a shot in over 4 decades. Unlike the LOC with Pakistan, which is very active in terms of firing across the line of control. So coming back to the LAC with China, we have been able to manage it with a process of meetings, both at the military and at diplomatic levels. Something changed last summer. Last summer, the clashes were a bit more violent, and for the first time in a very long time, we've had casualties on both sides. For the first time in a very long time, which is 45 years really, shots were fired, though these are two unconnected things. Where casualties occurred, shots were not fired, and where shots were fired, casualties did not occur. But the fact of the matter is that Rubicon has been broken. Why it happened? Now I come to your question. What has happened now suddenly? Over a period of time, at a tactical reason first, and then I will come to a larger reason before I wind up my remarks. At a tactical level, over a period of time, China has constructed a good road communication network right up to the borders. India, on the other hand, has not been able to construct the desired level of road communication network right up to the borders. For some, there were issues on our financial crunch, but there were also issues in our mindset. Till about a certain time, a decade or more ago, we were not comfortable with constructing so many roads on the borders, thinking that this could be misused by Chinese forces. Well, be that as it may, this mobilization differential between the two has given us, our military, a little bit of disadvantage in terms of mobilization on the borders. Or mobilization means mobilizing soldiers right up to the borders when required in a quick time. Now that we started creating more and more road infrastructure, the Chinese PLA, their army, has gotten worried, and they were not comfortable with our closing the mobilization differential. That means our constructing more and more roads. And at a tactical level, they have sought to increase their friction with our patrols and have tried to occupy or come into certain areas in our territory, or they've been stopped at the border. So this is one of the major reasons why the Chinese army took to what it did in last summers. And before I wind up my remarks, at a larger strategic level, China sees India as a potential adversary. In its very stated plan that it unfolds, it intends to replace United States as a sole superpower by 2049, a target which it has recently has advanced to 2027. So China has a stated aim of replacing US as a sole superpower. In so doing that, I go back to my sentence that in the Asian region, it sees India as one major stumbling block or a rival over here. To that extent, while it has resolved borders with many other countries, it has let the border issue with India remain, so that it can use that as a leverage uh, in keeping with other geopolitical dynamics. So to that extent, China would like to use this border as a leverage, border issue with India as a leverage to excite the issue, put pressure on India for various reasons. And as the discussion unfolds, we will talk about how other countries, the dynamics between other powers and China is playing out, and why it is impacting our situation at the borders. And at this time, we are talking of the situation only in Ladakh. Thank you.
We'll be adding a couple of political point to what Lieutenant General said, that as many as around more than 80 strategic Indo-China border road projects are currently going on across LAC. And it has been on hard push, especially as you mentioned on Ladakh, sir, that around 44 or 45 are the strategic border roads which are getting built. So on infrastructure development, this government has been doing some real good work to facilitate armed forces as well as building a greater connectivity for the civilians. And not only just border roads, there are other infrastructure projects in the area, including border outposts, mobile tower, railway lines are also in the plan. So some infrastructure work is really going on over there. We'll now ask Nitin Gokhale ji to give his opening remarks on the same topic, and then we'll continue the discussion.
Indeed, thank you very much. And I think General Dua has already laid out a very basic fact about what happened last year and why it happened. I would just like to add to those points that he made. In my view, there were 2 or 3 other tactical points, tactical reasons why the Chinese, apart from all the 3 reasons that he mentioned, the other reasons were also that the Chinese want to get their own army and their own personnel tested in real battle conditions. They haven't had a real battle or real war since 1979, in which they had the war with last time with Vietnam. And there's nothing better than testing their own personnel in high altitude areas of Aksai Chin and Ladakh. That was one of the subsets of the overall strategy, I would think. And China, because of the reasons that General Dua mentioned, that it sees India as a long-term adversary and a competitor in Asia at least. It also wanted to test Indian national and military resolve, and wanted to test how Indian military would respond, how soon, how quickly, and on what scale. I think that was the second objective, the smaller tactical objective. And the third, of course, was that given that Xi Jinping has to divert slight attention from the coronavirus pandemic creating problems within the country for a while, needed some kind of a diversion, and nothing better than having a border episode or a border standoff. So that would be one of the other smaller reasons for what the Chinese did. But overall, long term, they have this objective that they have to put India down, humiliate India, and also make sure that India doesn't become all powerful to not only take on or stand up to China, but also to test how India would react to what we call coalitions of the like-minded democracies like US, Japan, and Australia. I think that was the warning that they wanted to send to India, that don't get too close to the US and the Quad countries. We have to solve our own bilateral problems. But all that didn't work out the way it must have been planned in the minds of the Chinese decision makers. But we'll come to that later. But what it showed, the entire 9-month standoff and the current negotiations, as we speak, there is a 11th round of the Corps Commander level talk happening in Ladakh between Indian and Chinese Corps Commanders. to resolve the standoff or the friction points, the other friction points like Gogra, Hot Spring, and Depsang, at least those three. So the point here is that the Chinese would continue to try and keep India off balance by not resolving the boundary, not delineating and demarcating the border, and therefore India will have to take countermeasures. India acquitted itself creditably after the initial surprise, and that is a lot of there are a lot of takeaways for both India and China in what happened last year, and perhaps that will begin a new episode or a new chapter in the way the protocols and the agreements and the pacts between India and China have to be now designed and implemented. Everything that was done since 1993 onwards doesn't seem to have worked, and they seem to have become redundant. All those agreements, border defense cooperation agreement, the agreement on peace and tranquility, agreement on not chasing each other's patrols, all that has gone out of the window, and therefore both will have to find, as strategic affairs experts are prone to use the term, they have to find a new modus vivendi, a new method to get on and talk to each other. I think I'll stop at this point and then maybe take it forward if there are other points to be discussed.
Thank you, Nitinji, for your remarks on the same. And little surprise, a new viewpoint that China wanted to test their own military strength and what would be better than an equal or better equipped army. But this has been a long last debate or a point of discussion among the people that in the last wars we fought, our army used to be ill-prepared. Army had the josh, they wanted to fight for the motherland, but they were less equipped with the arms and ammunition. And when we draw back the comparisons from 1962, where at that time the army was lacking bulletproof jackets and current kind of preparations, I would like to know from Lieutenant General that how well prepared is the Indian Army to take on the Chinese challenge, and also a little bit one side there is China, and what if we get a two-side challenge from China and Pakistan both?
Look, you started off very correctly by also talking about 1962. We were not very well equipped. It's a fact. 1962, India had just emerged as an independent country a decade or more ago. And we were dealing with our own problems. Also, we did not expect an attack from the Chinese borders, because we were on a very good upswing of relations with them those days. And we were caught, if I may use the word, we were caught unprepared. So that is true. But let us remember that today is not 1962. Indian Army, Indian Armed Forces, I should say, and also India as a nation is not the same. So today, our army, our national capacity, our national resolve, our national power, to include other elements, is more than equipped to handle or to defend its borders, its territorial integrity against China in every manner. In fact, while I come to that later, but to take your question in the same stride, we are equipped at a stretch to handle both the fronts, China and Pakistan, simultaneously, because that is a writing on the wall that it is willy-nilly going to happen. If push comes to shove, and if we get into a war-like situation, Pakistan is likely to take advantage, and we are looking at a two-front, opening up two-front, or in fact, in the military parlance, we are quite used to using the term called two-and-a-half front to include the proxy of terrorism that is being perpetrated by Pakistan. So Indian armed forces and Indian resolve is totally geared for that. What does preparation mean? let me answer that in three parts. Military preparation essentially involves three things. Firstly, it involves the capability, the technological, equipment wise, all the wherewithal that is required by the military to fight. That means aircraft, guns, ammunition, platforms, ships, all other equipment that is required to prosecute operations. That is one part. The second part, and okay, let me finish that. So, in that aspect, Indian Army or Indian Armed Forces are absolutely capable of defending ourselves as far as Chinese borders are concerned. If there were any gaps at the tactical level, because it started off all of a sudden without any warning. If there were any gaps, minor gaps here and there, for instance, we got a lot of snow clothing equipment in last summer. We bought it off the shelf from the US and other countries. So if there were any gaps in that equipment, in special clothing, somewhere in some ammunition, some platforms, they have been made up. It is a good coincidence that Rafale fighters have been coming in at that time. So our air power also got, combat air power got a shot in the arm with that, and so on and so forth. I will not go into details. So that is as far as equipment is concerned. As far as combat experience goes, I think today there is no army which is more uh, uh, combat experienced than the Indian Armed Forces. In the Indian Army has been in operations, some operation or the other over the last few decades, whether it was starting off with Sri Lanka and Siachen, whether it was Punjab or thereafter a continuing thing it was a little bit in Northeast, but a continuing operations in J&K and in the high altitudes of Kargil and at the glacial heights of Siachen. We have a constant deployment and units are turned over. That means every 2 years, the battalions change and they get themselves combat experience. So we have very rich combat or operational experience. And the third part is about, apart from national resolve, but at military level, it is about the road infrastructure, the communication infrastructure. Road is a big part of the communication infrastructure. Now, in this, I have already mentioned, and we've spoken about it, that yes, India was at a disadvantage. India is making up fast. In fact, in the last couple of years, it is the number of bridges that we have made on in the border areas, which help our mobilization. It is the number of new roads that we have opened, without getting into details. It is that which has got the Chinese a little more worried at tactical level. There are other reasons, but at tactical level, it's got them worried. So these are the three aspects. And in all three of them, I think we are capable of defending our territorial integrity. Yes, more is required, more is being done, and it will always be work in progress. Thank you.
As rightly mentioned, this time we were much prepared, and not only we took decisive steps on borderline, but also some very required steps in the front of doing businesses with China. And as we have some 100-odd students sitting from management over here, would also share that how India was prepared to tackle the Chinese hegemony, especially in investments and goods they have. So as they started kind of an clash off with India in the border, one of the initial steps which we took was cancelling all the agreements we have on all the work orders we have given to Chinese companies. And why they were so much important? We started with road projects, infrastructure projects, which were done by China. There were a lot of other projects in railways, some into telecommunications, especially with government companies like BSNL. So I would like to ask Nitin Gokhaleji about it, that what we have done so far so good, and what are other more things we should often do as soon as possible and tame.
Well, I think that is something that India was prepared to do, not only on the border, standing firm and an eyeball to eyeball deployment, But India also sent a very strong message by banning Chinese apps on mobile phones, limiting the investment from China, and in fact coming up with a rule for limiting investment from countries bordering India, investing in crucial core sectors and strategic sectors like telecom and electricity. If you look at the new rules that have been promulgated from June onwards, they will come into force. In India's 5G competition, for instance, there will be a scrutiny. There will be a committee that will go into which are the companies that are supplying the core technology for the 5G rollout. And clearly, the new rule is targeted at Huawei, which is very keen to get into the Indian market. And I think that message couldn't have been clearer, that India is prepared to take steps other than kinetic operations, other than war, and other than confrontation, to get into a position where China will get that message. And I think that is where I think Chinese were surprised. They should have taken lessons from what had happened in Doklam in 2017, when India had stood firm, as for the first time had gone into Bhutan to stop Chinese advance into that area in Chumbi Valley in Doklam area. But Chinese either through sheer foolhardiness or just to take revenge for Doklam, because the world perceived Doklam to be a setback for Chinese prestige. So China wanted to take a revenge, or they just overestimated their own strength and therefore did what they did in Ladakh, a little realizing that India has changed. India's outlook has changed. India's decision makers are far more firmer, far more determined to take on China and make sure that India's territorial integrity and sovereignty is not violated. So that, I think, the comprehensive national power and all of government approach is something that would have surprised China. And they did several steps have been taken in the business front, on the investment front. Simultaneously, India is now trying to attract more investment from Taiwan, which is red flag for China in many ways. And also openly now tweeting and government handles or MEA handles, at least doing small little, I would say, gestures towards Taiwan, which angers China no end. So the game has really begun now, and we'll have to be prepared to play it over a long period of time. China has deeper pockets than India. China has risen much faster, has a better, stronger economy and a larger military. So that should always be kept in mind. But that doesn't mean India is going to roll over and surrender. I think that is the clearest message in the 2020 episode, which finally ended in February.
Apart from the government, I think people across the nation also participated in India's economic offensive, I will say, and boycotted China. I think more than 3,000 plus products were listed by CAIT, and till now it is estimated that around 90,000 crore has been lost by China in doing businesses with India. So it has been really fantastic. And then coming up with Atmanirbhar Bharat, the government has been really pushing to shed China and Chinese investments across India. And as you rightly mentioned, Nitinji, that fostering friendship with China is, fostering friendship with Taiwan is one thing we should have been really looking for. And this can be a way of countering the wolf diplomacy. I would like to know your views about it.
So you're asking me?
Yes, Nitinji.
Okay. No, wolf warrior diplomacy is something that the Chinese are taking pride in, but it is giving them diminishing returns. So they're welcome to do what they want to do. I have always maintained for over a decade now, China has three vulnerabilities, at least in their own mind. And I call it the three T's vulnerabilities. One is Tibet, second is Taiwan, and third is Tiananmen. The moment one talks about Tiananmen Square episode of 1989, 4th June 1989, the Chinese get very angry, and they are very touchy about Tibet. and also about Taiwan. And as you must have, all of you would have read probably or come across this news item, that China was pressurizing Paraguay of all countries in South America, which has recognized Taiwan, has diplomatic relations with Taiwan, to take their own Chinese vaccines in return for breaking off relations with Taiwan. And India actually helped Taiwan to supply vaccines to Paraguay. So this game, as I said, it's not limited to India's borders or India's immediate neighborhood. It can have international and far-reaching and distant ramifications, as evident from whatever has happened. So I would think one must play on China's vulnerabilities in their mind, at least, by increasing our interaction with Taiwan, by talking about Tibet more often, and even allowing the Dalai Lama to perhaps visit Arunachal once more, and even go a step further, I would say, by naming the Tawang Tejpur Road as a Dalai Lama road, because that's the road he came into when he fled Tibet in 1959. I think those are the steps India must be prepared to take, and also be prepared for the backlash. But that's the way one has to deal with China. And I think India is prepared to do that, even if it hasn't shown that that hand yet. But I think that should happen in coming years.
Yes.
Can I add something, Zankrut?
Yeah, sure.
You know, I will agreeing totally with what Nitin has said. I would also like to sort of reinforce one particular issue. When we spoke of, and Nitin spoke of, very rightly spoke of, or even you mentioned, steps taken in the on the commercial side, certain steps taken by India. Let us also remember that while on one hand, like Nitin said, China is also trying to sort of get out of the ashes of Doklam, is also trying to test how far can it go with India, etc. But when Indian resolve stood up, they were perhaps not prepared for it. This is not a military field, but let's, as an informed citizen, I'd like to say that we are the only country which have actually banned their apps. All the Chinese apps that were banned, even the United States of America, despite all its talk and despite even the previous president being very sort of taking a lot of belligerent steps, they have not banned any app. We have cut them out of many commercial contracts by name. Okay, we will not let China participate in these contracts. We are stonewalling there, or we've asked for a lot of queries on their 5G issues, which is a major rollout as far as China is concerned, and of course the world is concerned. But what I'm trying to point out, that, and there may be many other steps that I am not aware, I've not been able to list, but we have actually done something that the world is talking about. The only country to have really done that in a significant manner. Now, having said that, the other issues which Nitin also raised now about whether it's Taiwan or our Tibet card. Now, my take on this is that this, though we all keep talking about it, and there are very genuine causes or chapters that we have, both China and India are dependent on, and we are we don't read too much about it in the media, which is the right way to go. So all I'm trying to say is that everything cannot be done only on the basis of such discussions. The planners, I'm sure, are doing things which are far deeper than what meets the eye, and we have to take a concerted view. There is one thing to do, something to do at the tactical level and in the military level, military diplomatic level, which is going on. Like Nitin also mentioned, as we talk today, the Corps Commander level talks are going on today in Ladakh. So everything is progressing. But for the bigger, larger steps, we have to take an overall view as a whole of government approach in which all the elements of power, diplomatic, that is economic, commercial, energy security,
to India. And it clearly mentions, I have tweeted the copy, and it created some repercussions for them, that they clearly asked their counterparts in India to delete any kind of content which is against Chinese government, which is anything pro for Dalai Lama or which is anything for freedom of Tibet. This is the kind of level, the kind of content censorship China is offering to the world. And with their tech and with their applications across, I think one of the greatest steps Indian government can take is to pin select and ban all the applications which were threat to the national security and integrity. And while we were discussing the 5G, I think there has been a lot of happenings of how we create technology, and which I think students and people interested in the telecommunications business should look for. That with the deal of Facebook and Reliance Jio, then the deal between Google and Reliance Jio, a lot of things are interesting. Business happenings are going on over there. We'll move to. So we discussed a bit, and I think I personally feel this can be. I need your opinion on from both of you that we consider or we take Nepal for granted for a lot of times, and there has been issues of who's the bigger brother to Nepal ends, whether it's India or whether it's China, and no doubt we have the basic religious and cultural commonality with Nepal. Still, China has been trying to get inside it. And with their current regime in Nepal, I think there has been some issues with Nepal. I would like to know how we can resolve them and what are the current actions. Nitinji can start.
I'll be very brief on this because the fact is that China has been trying to in countries around India, South Asia, in the Indian for almost 30 years now. It's an ongoing contest. You look at any country in the neighborhood, Nepal, and that is one country China has not been able to influence much despite a lot of pressure. Huge kind of pressure has been put on Bhutan to conclude the boundary agreement with China. China has been claiming falsely a lot of things with Bhutan. But coming to Nepal itself, Nepal, because it has gone through that difficult transition from monarchy to democracy, it has had vulnerabilities amongst its politicians, which China has exploited and has used it to its advantage. But Nepalese trade cannot be operated through China, which are 3,000 kilometers away. Nepal is a south-facing country. It's a south-supported and south-facing country in the sense that it is dependent on India for many things. So I don't think in the long run India needs to worry about. These are matters of politics, real politics, and also the people who get tempted by Chinese, I would say, allurements that are given by the Chinese, and therefore we are facing that. Yes, they don't like Tibetans to operate in Nepal, and Nepal has been obliging the Chinese in many.
Yeah. Should
Yeah,
I?
sure.
Yeah, okay. I'll build on what Nitin said very correctly. If China is making inroads in, and put it in a different manner, it is doing that because it has to. India doesn't have to build inroads into Nepal. 8 million Nepalese work in India. In around your house and mine, we have Nepali workers working. They don't have a visa. They come and work here. They send money back home. They go home. They come back. India as their motherland. Gorkha regiments, their bravery is legendary. So, with these kind of linkages, India and Nepal are joined at the hip. So we don't need to worry about what China can do. China will do what it will try to do. And I don't, that like, I'll borrow the word from Nitin, is a real politic. Aisa hota hai, hoga. Did we all not read last week? I think there was an issue in Mizoram where 1,000 or 800 odd Burmese, Myanmar citizens were accepted as refugees, much against the central government's wishes. But the Mizoram government said we can't turn them away. Why? Because Mizos on one side and Chin are actually essentially the same stock. So they said we will not, although, I don't expand the discussion, but of a different tribe or different community was turned away. So these linkages is something that you can't wish away. So India and Nepal are joined at the hip. We will have our linkages, but again, Nitin mentioned this, and I'll just make a passing reference to it. That does not mean that India should not do what is right. India should continue to make sure that we don't let them fall into different kind of incentives or disincentives from the other side. They should not get caught up by the narratives from the other side. Political issues play a part. A communist country, communist party, all those kinds of things will happen. We must continue to remain an even keel. But let's not make too much of a bogey that how will these linkages be resolved if Nepal does not want to have same relationship and friendship and borders with India? But we must not rest on our laurels. And remember that Nepal is an independent country. We must give due dignity and respect. But nevertheless, also be reassured and not get carried away by a few academicians and our kind of panel discussions that, oh, I will take over. No, we have far stronger linkages which no government, either in India or in Nepal or even in China, can wish away. Thank you.
Can't agree more about that. Yes, I never said that we don't have the deep linkages. All I wanted to just little about discuss about that. Are we taking them for granted? But I think you made it very clear that the kind of connectivity we both have, and if anybody has visited Nepal, they must be knowing this, that our currency rates also are same forever. So not from economic to religious to cultural to language, each and everything, we have a great transaction with them, and we are in continuous bond of friendship, and hope it remains forever the same. While we were talking about the while sharing your opinion last time, you said that the 11th round of talk is going on between India and China. How well is this disengagement process going on? And we have heard that many times, especially we're so much habituated of listening about the talks which keeps on going with, but it is more with politicians, and they keep talking about Shanti Vartas and flying pigeons all the time. But this time, army to army level talks are going on, and so kindly brief us about it. And is it likely that they will serve its purpose?
You're asking me or General Dua?
General Dua.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay,
General Dua, yes.
Let me take on.
Yeah.
Thank you. So, look, few months ago, there was a lot of concern in the country, rightly so, as to now both the armies are poised in a very close proximity, if not eyeball to eyeball, and at some places they were really eyeball to eyeball kind of confrontation. When two nuclear countries, which have recently had a spate of casualties on both sides, have nearly come to blows and war, if they are poised like this, it's a worrisome sign, not only for the two countries, it is a worrisome sign for the world. So a few months ago, that was the situation. Talks were going on at every level, sometimes rough and sometimes very long talks without yielding any results. But the good part was that engagement was going on at three levels. Engagement was going on at the diplomatic level, engagement was going on first at the military level, and there were also channels working at various ministries and security apparatus of both the countries. Now, with that happening, we came to a pass a few months ago where we decided to disengage. When I say we, I'm talking about both the countries. Now, when we started to disengage, whatever was the disengagement process, without expanding the discussion, there was a lot of rhetoric against in the media. No, we have given up this area and that we should not have withdrawn from that height. And even I have written an article about it. I've read Nitin's discussion and debates and articles on that. After all, there there was an agreement to disengage, and we have started disengaging. Now, that is something that we should have take a sigh of relief on, because if you are poised face to face, eyeball to eyeball, one magic corporal, the term that was coined in the Middle East, one NCO is enough to start off a war. If somebody gets drunk, or if somebody does it out of a clear misunderstanding, and somebody has to fire one burst, the other side will fire another burst of LMG, and then it can just spiral out of control. So it is good that this has happened the way it has happened. It is good that disengagement has started physically, not only in the mind. But yes, a lot of work remains to be done. We have come out of a couple of places. Other places need to be resolved. Not everything is in public domain, and it need not be, because frankly, certain things have to be left to the military or to the diplomatic on a need to know basis. And that kind of disengagement is going on. Now, to end the round of the thing, what I would like to say is it is work in progress. We in the public will come to know as and when the authorities decide whatever is to be released in public domain. But the fact is that the test of the time comes now. It is already we are in April. It is somewhere in June when movements will start. I mean, it is still very cold up there. And it is in the summers, as you see every time that there has been a standoff or a face-off between the two armies. It has always been in summers. We have to see how much disengagement, how forward has the disengagement process moved by that time, so that we are not in danger of something that can spiral out of control again. And to that extent, I think it's a heartening sign the way we are moving, considering where we were about 6 months ago. Thank you.
Yes, I think General Dua has said what needed to be said. I'll just add one more point that, last year, if India was surprised in the initial stages, this year it's unlikely to be surprised, because things have improved, things have changed. Obviously, precautionary measures have been put in place. And the talks, while they are ongoing, India is also keeping a watch on the Chinese movements. Like you mentioned, the exercises from the Chinese side begin around May, June, and already preparations can be seen on the other side, apparently, on, again, that same exercise happening.
Nitin.
Can admin unmute Nitinji?
Oh, I think he's disconnected.
Can some admin help to unmute Nitinji?
Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you now.
Yeah.
Okay. So I was just saying that, can you hear me, see me, whatever?
Yeah, we can see and listen to you both, Nitinji.
Okay. So I was saying that that is something that India will have to be careful about, like General Dua said. And I think there are lessons from last year's standoff. Until the border is resolved, and as India has been saying that demarcate the border, clarify the LAC, that will happen. But going forward, I think one of the lessons, takeaways from last year was the engagement, as General Dua mentioned, between the forces, the ground commanders, the corps commanders. So as they talk to each other, and now the current corps commander from the Indian side has been there since October, he would have taken part in about 4 rounds of talks with his counterpart. That kind of, I can't call it bonhomie, but the familiarity that they've built with each other will also take care of a lot of small problems at the local level. And I think that's a good sign that the military is leading the talks, because they are on the ground. And of course, the MEA's representative is part of the process. This system of corps commander level talks, and one WMCC, what is called the Working Mechanism for Consultation and Coordination for Border Affairs between India and China, takes place. Again, it gets back to the corps commander level talks. So I think both sides are at least keen on keeping the engagement going. Whether that solution finally will come in those friction points or not remains to be seen. And remember, disengagement in north and south of Pangang Tso took 9 rounds of talks over a period of nearly 6 months. or more. From June onwards, the talk started and the disengagement took place in February. So for 2 more or 3 more friction points, at least give them a chance to talk for more rounds before that disengagement, and not constantly pick and have suspicion about what the commanders on the ground are doing or our interlocutors are doing with the Chinese.
Hoping with the best and soon. One thing, media, pushing the media narratives. So, they control tech application news applications. We have banned some of them. I think I will say majorly all of them, but still, their investors are the ones who invest in applications and will listen the news from them. Suspicion arise that what kind of news are broadcasted from there. News channels, all of our major entertainment and news channels, they are transmitted from the satellite links from China. This again raises suspicions that are they trying to analyze and come out with the analytics that what kind of content can create mishaps in our nation. How are we going to deal with it? And it is clear that they study us. On other side, we are still in doubts that what are we doing about it? Apart from some or other good time Amir Khan movies getting launched over there and getting some good theatrical show. But what are we doing in terms of media narrative? And this is specific to Nitin Jim. Can somebody unmute Nitinji, please?
Nitinji is, I think he's not here. Yes,
Somebody has
yes.
to unmute.
Darshana?
It's from this side.
Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
Let us check what's happened. Unmute.
Yes, ma'am. I've asked to unmute.
Please to click.
Please to accept the request.
I think the connection is weak.
Okay, maybe some technical.
We can have the book launch then.
Yeah. Yes. We have Lieutenant General writing some great and sharing the great untold stories. And as the name of the book says, Untold Stories from the Indian Army, India's Brave Hearts. And it must be a wonderful book. We all love to listen the stories, maybe from Jawans, maybe in some movies, but this coming directly from someone who has led the army across decades. I would like to know much more about it from the Lieutenant General and the author himself. Sir, please.
Thank you, Zankrut, for giving me an opportunity. So, friends, I have been in the counter-terrorism operations for 4 decades. For majority part of my 4 decades of service in the army, I have been in counter-terrorist operations. I have all my commands from commanding a company to commanding a corps, and in between the battalion, brigade, division, everything has been in counter-terrorist operations. So I have seen this life of firsthand, up close, have participated in operations, have participated in heartbreaks, have participated in successful operation, not so successful operations, have lost soldiers on my watch, have lost colleagues, seen the heartbreaks and ups and downs. So what I decided to do after retirement was to put some of these first-hand experiences. It's not a work of research, it's just first-hand experiences straight from the heart. I have tried to put them out. So it's a small book from a paperback from Juggernaut Books. And it's mostly centered around my experience around the line of control. Bulk of the stories are as I commanded a battalion for more than 3 years on the line of control in J&K. This was from 1998 to 2001. So I talk about how I learned to train with the soldiers, to live with the soldiers, to go into operations with them. And in counter-terrorist operations, there is another thing. It is not enemy. You are actually fighting in your own area, in your own villages and sometimes small towns. But in that area, in countryside, it is other villagers who are innocent people. They tend to get hurt. So you are actually fighting with one hand tied behind your back. But you have to make sure that your own citizens, your own countrymen who are innocent people, bystanders, don't get hurt. So these are very tricky sort of operations. I have also written about certain very heartrending stories about, let's say, how to break the news, something that we cannot be trained for. How do we break the news to a family? I have had to do this. I lost 8 soldiers on my watch when I was a commanding officer. Out of that, 2 were officers. How do you break the news to his wife, who's talking to you normally? You've known her ever since she got married. And suddenly you have to break the news that tomorrow your husband's body will arrive. He fought very bravely. That's a very abrupt way of doing it. No one, believe me, no one can train you for it. I've had to go to somebody's house few days later in the condolence ceremony in another city in Punjab. And I could see it. The mother almost blamed me. It is natural, it happens. And you come back guilty. Come back guilty, feeling guilty that why did you come back alive when your colleague could not come back alive? Imagine that for the rest of my life, every time I think of that, I always feel guilty that I'm alive. It's a thought. It's something that stays with us. So what I was trying to say, friends, is that those are the different aspects. It's not only about heroism. There were very heroic soldiers. I've written about them. There were heroic encounters where soldiers have displayed or officers have displayed raw courage and bravery, and I've written about them. I've written about how narrow escapes one has had, how foolish sometimes one has been. But it's all to do with what difficult lives soldiers lead on the line of control. There were some funny instances. I've written about that as well. I've written about hospitals where doctors work with such great dedication. One story is dedicated to officers. I beg your pardon, to hospital. Okay, let me just take last 2 minutes to tell you about one anecdote. Zankrut, can I have time?
Yeah, sure, sir.
All right. So when I was Corps Commander, that is in 2015-16, I was Corps Commander in Kashmir. That means I was in charge of all the army deployed in all of Kashmir. And one day I went to the base hospital, which used to get a lot of casualties. Somebody's a gunshot wound, a grenade shot wound, somebody's amputated one foot because of a landmine blast, and so on and so forth. So I went and saw there was an officer in the officer ward. I would meet the casualties, and the doctor told me, "Sir, this officer is refusing to go on sick leave." Now he was returning. He was a special forces officer. He was returning after an encounter, and the mob started pelting stones at them. We don't fire at the mob because they are just venting their anger. So this officer had his jaw broken. 4 of his jaws were broken. Jaws was wired up, and he was being sent home on sick. He was being sent home on sick leave. Sick leave means you just go home for a couple of weeks and then return once you are a little okay, because you don't require any treatment. You only require rest and recoup. He was refusing to go. I asked him. When I saw this young man, I said, "What's your name?" He says, "Captain Pavan, sir." I said, "Why don't you want to go on sick leave?" He says, "Sir, I want to be with the boys," with great amount of josh. I smiled. He was such a young man, and he says, "I want to be with the boys." You know what is boys? Endearingly, we call our soldiers as boys. Now, his boys were seasoned special forces soldiers, all of them in their 30s and some even in their 40s. This boy was such a young lad and said, "Sir, I want to be with the boys." I mean, he wanted to go back to soldiers and not go home to Haryana where he belonged. I asked him, "Son, what is your age?" 23, sir. 23 years. And he said, "I want to be with the boys." He was younger than my younger son. This is 2015. I broke protocol. I ruffled his hair a little bit. And I said, "Happy hunting, son." And I told the doctor, Doc, let him do what he wants." And I walked out. 2 weeks later, friends, I saluted his dead body in a casket. There was a huge operation in which on 20th February 2016, where a 6-story building was four suicide terrorists stormed into a 6-story building, took 66 Kashmiri young men and women hostage. And we had a huge situation for 2 days. He and others stormed the building. They actually rescued everyone, but we paid a heavy price. We lost three of our brave hearts, including Captain Pavan. So that is the kind of story, and that's one story in my book. And of course, I've written in greater detail. What I'm trying to say is today also, as I tell you this, it gives me goosebumps. So such are the kind of fables, such are the experiences that one writes about. I hope they serve to inspire the younger generation as the kind of responses I've been getting. And I hope it meets with your expectations if any one of you choose to read this book. Thank you, Zakul.
Sir, it would be a pleasure to read. In management schools, we keep talking about human relations and how to manage them in workplaces. But I think one of the most difficult and I will say heartbreaking and heart-nerving scenarios must have been described in the book. And it will be of great help for everyone to read this and to maybe share this with our colleagues. And may it also give us the lessons about how to deal in such tough situations. I think it was a wonderful session, and we discussed on that how in last 1 year, I may say, we have surely pushed the dragon back in its own den, and tiger has been roaring. And as everyone says, this century belongs to India. And with all the difficulties we are facing, as our Prime Minister says, "Mana ki andhera ghana hai, par diya jalana kahan mana hai." And in all these tough situations, I think we have something as strong as a sense and a push of being an Atmanirbhar Bharat, not relying on any of our neighbors, friends, I will say frenemies, rather, and being so strong that we can lead the world for the future. And I think the responsibility lies with everyone. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Zanku. Thank you, General Sir. And I thank Nitin Gokhale as well, who had joined all the way from Port Blair. Well, it was quite an interesting conversation. The panel not only discussed on how India has evolved a new frame of leadership, but also discussed the role of infrastructure in military warfare, and how by increasing and strengthening its infrastructure, India has strengthened its case at its borders. We discussed how the 3 Ts, Tibet, Taiwan, and Tiananmen, are China's biggest weakness. The panel shared how India has blocked China in the 5G race in India, and how perhaps India was the only country to have blocked all those apps which it did last year. India's response to China's influence in South Asia does not necessarily have to be the way China does it. Thank you, General Saab, once again for sharing stories and anecdotes from your life, which you have noted down in the book. We wish you very best of luck with the book. And sir, to be very honest, me and my wife enjoy your uploads on Instagram. We like to see your biking adventures, and we see a very different side of you. I wish you, sir, all the best for your retired life, and we hope to see more books, literature content coming from you, especially with regards to your years in the service. I also thank Zanka, our friend at VESM, our alumni teacher at VESM, for joining and moderating this session. I thank our live audience on Zoom as well as Facebook. And we will now take a break for lunch, and we'll start again at 1:30 p.m.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you.